My girlfriend asked me to wait for her at the airport while she was still getting ready, but my plane departed as she was typing her excuse message. Hey everyone, my name is Daniel, and I'm 29 years old. I've been living in Miami with my wife Victoria for the past couple of years since we got married. Life seemed to be going well on the surface. I work as a marketing consultant, making decent money, and we were living what I thought was the good life. At least, that's what I believed until everything came crashing down. It all started when I was flying back from a business trip to Chicago. Victoria had asked me to wait before leaving, saying something about wanting to talk before my plane departed. The strange thing was, her message came through while I was still in the terminal, nowhere near boarding yet. As I sat there staring at my phone, a thought hit me harder than any turbulence I'd ever experienced. Something wasn't adding up anymore. I still had the stale taste of airline pretzels in my mouth when I checked my phone and saw a new message from Victoria. Can we talk before you leave? Just 10 minutes, it read. But by the time her message came through, I was already fastening my seatbelt, and the safety demonstration was halfway finished. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button before curling it into a fist. The plane was already pushing away from the gate, and it was too late to respond. What bothered me most wasn't just the timing of her message, but how different her tone was from the night before. When I was hesitating about leaving for the trip, she had told me to just go already, as if I was being overly dramatic for having second thoughts. I remembered her standing at the door with her arms folded, offering no kiss, no hug, just that dead stare, while barely looking up from her phone. It's just 4 days, she had said flatly. You'll survive. I used to think Victoria was elegant, calm, and poised, qualities I found attractive about her. But lately, it just felt like detachment wrapped in designer clothes. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, I couldn't stop thinking about how she hadn't even asked which hotel I'd be staying at. She used to double-check those kinds of details, even if it was just to complain about my awful habit of booking accommodations at the last minute. This time was different, though. She hadn't even mentioned my business trip once in the entire week leading up to it. I actually had to remind her that I was leaving. Once the Wi-Fi clicked on mid-flight, notifications started rolling in on my phone. My group chat was buzzing with activity, and I noticed that Victoria's sister Carmen had posted a video of what looked like some kind of party. I tapped on it out of pure boredom, expecting to see another typical family dinner or gathering with their relatives. But what I saw wasn't that at all. The video was dimly lit with low golden lighting that gave everything a warm, intimate glow. Music was thumping heavily in the background with that chest-rattling bass that you feel as much as you hear. And there she was, Victoria, laughing far too hard at something someone had said. Her hair was perfectly curled, and her long legs were crossed elegantly under a black dress that I had never seen before in my life. But what made my stomach drop wasn't the dress or even her laughter. It was how her hands were draped across a man's shoulder. This wasn't a friendly, casual touch between acquaintances. It was familiar, possessive, intimate. My lungs felt like they were tightening as I watched. That laugh. I hadn't heard Victoria laugh like that in weeks, maybe months. Certainly not directed at me or anything I had said. The caption on the video read, "Wild nights with wild hearts, love you forever at B_Martinez." Who the hell was B. Martinez? I found myself freezing up, rewatching the video over and over, zooming in on details, desperately trying to find some way to explain what I was seeing. Maybe it was old footage that Carmen had just posted now. But then the audio caught someone in the background saying, "Cheers to this week," and someone else mentioned something about the new menu at a bar that had just opened on Tuesday. No, this wasn't old footage at all. This was fresh, recent, current. The realization hit me like a physical blow because Victoria had specifically told me she was working late that particular night. She'd said something about needing to catch up on client presentations and seemed stressed about it. I had even asked if she wanted me to bring home Thai food from our usual place, and she'd declined, saying she had already eaten at the office. I remember that night clearly now. I didn't eat that evening either, and the unopened pad Thai containers sat sweating on my nightstand while I lay in bed. Victoria came home well past 1 a.m. and went straight to the shower without saying much to me. I can still recall the sound of the water running while I stared at the ceiling with my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't understand at the time. Now I understood completely. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had asked me to wait, wanting those 10 minutes to talk before I left. But there I was, flying 35,000 feet above the lie she thought she could wrap up in a simple 10-minute conversation. I didn't sleep at all that night in the hotel. The bed felt foreign and stiff in all the wrong places, nothing like the familiar comfort of home. I kept rolling over repeatedly, staring at the ceiling as if it might somehow spell out a better version of the truth I was grappling with. I must have replayed that video at least 20 times, pausing on every single frame and studying the details obsessively. I analyzed the curve of Victoria's smile, the way her head tilted toward this mysterious man, the body language that suggested she'd known him for years rather than being a casual acquaintance. The touch wasn't accidental or innocent. I could see that clearly now. The way her fingers lingered on the back of his neck was deliberate and intimate. It was a move I recognized because I'd seen it before, directed at me years ago when we were still in the honeymoon phase of our relationship. I tried to breathe deeply, tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was nothing serious. Maybe she was just drunk and being overly friendly. Maybe I was going crazy and reading too much into an innocent moment between friends. I texted her, "You up?" hoping for some kind of normal response that might ease my growing paranoia. There was no response at all. Then, in a moment that felt half insane, I found myself opening Carmen's Instagram account again and clicking on Brandon's public profile. His full name was Brandon Martinez, and he lived in Dallas working as a real estate agent. His feed was filled with the typical shirtless photos you'd expect from a CrossFit enthusiast, complete with that big, stupid grin and captions like "Grind never sleeps" and "Only real ones rise at dawn." But it wasn't his muscles or his wannabe influencer vibe that made my stomach turn violently. It was the devastating realization that Victoria had liked every single one of his photos going back 8 months. 8 full months of consistent interaction with this man I'd never heard her mention once. Feeling sick to my stomach, I opened our message thread and started scrolling backwards through weeks of conversations. The pattern that emerged was both clear and heartbreaking. I had been initiating every single conversation between us. "Dinner tonight? How was work? Want to do something fun this weekend?" Half of my messages had gone completely unanswered, while the other half received responses like "busy," "exhausted," or "another time," "another time," "another man." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The flight home couldn't come soon enough. Every minute felt like an eternity as my mind raced with questions and scenarios I didn't want to consider. When I finally landed back in Miami, I didn't drive straight home like I normally would after a business trip. Instead, I found myself driving to Victoria's clinic where she worked. It was a Sunday, so I knew the place would be closed for business. But something compelled me to check anyway. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her car sitting there in the nearly empty space. My heart sank as I turned off my engine and sat there in the silence, trying to process what this meant. There was a light on inside the break room, visible even from where I was parked. As I watched, I could make out 2 distinct shadows moving behind the blinds. One of them was clearly taller than Victoria, and the silhouette was unmistakably masculine. I stepped out of my car, suddenly feeling colder than the Miami weather should have made me feel. I didn't knock on the door, and I didn't barge inside to confront whatever was happening. I just stood there in that parking lot, staring at that damned light and watching that tall silhouette reach for Victoria's waist in a gesture that was far too intimate for a professional setting or casual friendship. I left the clinic not because I was scared of what I might find if I went inside, but because I already knew the truth with complete certainty. I wasn't Victoria's husband anymore. I was just an obligation she hadn't figured out how to cancel yet. The realization hit me with stunning clarity as I drove away from that parking lot, leaving behind any remaining illusions about my marriage. That night marked the second night in a row that I couldn't sleep. I sat in my car outside our house for 30 long minutes with the engine turned off and my keys gripped tightly in my hand. I found myself staring at our front door as if it belonged to complete strangers. It was 1 a.m., all the lights in the house were off, and Victoria's car was sitting in the driveway where it should be. But I had no idea what I was about to walk into, and honestly, I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. Part of me hoped for an explanation I could believe, an apology that might make sense, or even a lie I could swallow long enough to figure out what to think. When I finally worked up the courage to walk inside, everything felt unnaturally still and quiet. The silence was broken only by the quiet humming of our refrigerator and the faint scent of that lavender candle Victoria always left burning in the kitchen. I stood in the hallway and listened carefully to the sounds of the house. Then I heard it. Her laugh, soft and muffled like a hiccup, coming from upstairs. I climbed the steps slowly, my hand trembling against the railing. But the trembling wasn't from fear. It was from a cold, steady rage that had settled deep in my spine. This wasn't the loud, explosive kind of anger that burns hot and fast. This was the frost-like kind that creeps in slowly and changes everything it touches. Our bedroom door was cracked open just enough for me to see the glow from Victoria's phone, illuminating one side of the bed. She wasn't alone, but not in the physical sense I had been dreading. Instead, she was on a FaceTime call with him, with Brandon. I could hear her whispering softly into the phone. I wish he didn't have to wait so long. Brandon said something I couldn't make out from where I stood, and Victoria responded with a quiet giggle that made my blood run cold. He's completely clueless, she continued in that same hushed tone. Still thinks I'm just tired all the time. There was a pause before she added, maybe I'll just say I need space or a sabbatical or something. He won't fight it. He never does. I stood there in the doorway, completely frozen by what I was hearing. Victoria looked peaceful and content, like someone who was finally living a life that fit her perfectly. But that life clearly didn't include me. It hadn't included me for months, apparently. When I finally pushed the door open wider, she didn't notice me at first. Then she looked up, and I watched the color drain completely from her face. "Daniel," she said, her voice tight with surprise and something that might have been annoyance. I watched her phone slip quickly under the blanket as if hiding it could somehow change what I had already heard. "I saw the video," I said, surprised by how steady and calm my own voice sounded. It didn't crack, didn't scream, didn't break. I just told her the simple truth. I know about him. I saw you at the clinic tonight. I've known for days. I just wanted to see how far you'd take this whole charade. Instead of the guilt or shame I might have expected, Victoria's face hardened into something cold and distant. She didn't look like someone who had been caught doing something wrong. She looked annoyed, like I had interrupted something important that she had been enjoying. "You should have stayed on your trip," she said coldly, without any trace of remorse or explanation. There it was. Not an apology, not a defense, not even an attempt to explain herself. Just dismissal. Complete, cold dismissal of me and everything we had supposedly built together. I felt the breath leave my chest in one long, slow exhale, and I knew that was the exact moment everything changed permanently. Our marriage didn't end with a dramatic fight or an emotional breakdown. It ended with a single sentence that was flat, bitter, and absolutely final. Victoria didn't cry, and she didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't even flinch when I told her I had seen the video, or that I had sat outside her clinic while she wrapped her arms around another man. She just pulled the blanket tighter around herself and said, with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather, "I was going to tell you eventually. Eventually." Like I was a dentist appointment she kept rescheduling, or an unpleasant task she'd get around to when it became more convenient. I stood there motionless while my heartbeat pounded so loudly in my ears that I could barely think straight. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. Not necessarily the betrayal itself, because I was beginning to realize that wouldn't matter to her at all. I wanted her to understand the magnitude of what she had destroyed, what we had built together over years of marriage. "How long?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Victoria looked down at the comforter, her fingers tracing the seams like she was calculating something or trying to remember exact dates. 7 months? Maybe 8, she said finally, as if she was estimating how long she'd had a particular job or lived at an address. That number hit me harder than I had expected it to. 7 months made it real and tangible in a way that abstract suspicions couldn't. This wasn't a recent mistake or a moment of weakness. This was 7 months of deliberate lies, carefully crafted excuses, and looking me directly in the eye while she was falling into someone else's bed. I took a deep breath, feeling my throat burn as I forced out the next question. "Why?" I asked, though I was starting to dread the answer. Victoria shrugged with the same casual indifference she might have shown if I had asked why she ordered oat milk instead of regular milk in her coffee. "Because I was bored, Daniel," she said flatly. "Because you were gone all the time for work. Because every single day with you felt like watching a rerun of a show I stopped caring about years ago." Those words landed with the kind of devastating weight that you never forget, no matter how much time passes. They weren't spoken in anger or heat of the moment. They were delivered with cold, calculated honesty that made them infinitely worse. "You could have left," I said, barely able to push the words past the tightness in my throat. "You could have told me how you felt instead of doing this." "I didn't want to deal with the fallout," she replied, without missing a beat. "You're dramatic when you're hurt, and I just didn't want to handle all of that emotional mess." I stared at this woman I had once built a life with. Someone I had traveled with, made late-night pancakes with, kissed under Christmas lights during our first winter together. She was completely gone. This cold, calculating person wearing Victoria's voice and face wasn't the woman I had married. This was someone else entirely. Someone cruel, manipulative, and utterly without empathy. In that moment, I felt something break inside me. But it wasn't like a window shattering into 1,000 pieces. The break was cleaner, more surgical, like a switch being flipped from one position to another. "No more," I whispered, the words coming out with a finality that surprised even me. "You don't get to write the script anymore." Victoria rolled her eyes dismissively and turned away from me, already reaching for her phone with the clear intention of resuming her conversation with Brandon. She was probably planning to text him a play-by-play of our confrontation, turning our marriage's death into entertainment for her new relationship. Without another word, I walked out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and straight out of the house. I didn't slam the door behind me, didn't leave any dramatic parting words or threats. I simply left her exactly where she had left me emotionally months ago. I drove for hours that night with no music, just the steady hum of the engine and the chaotic, irregular beat of my thoughts crashing into each other like waves in a storm. Every red light felt like a trial I had to endure, and every street sign served as a reminder that I didn't know where the hell I was going anymore. This wasn't just about being physically lost in the city. I had no idea what to do with my life, with my future, with everything I had thought I knew about myself and my marriage. It's funny how quickly your entire reality can disintegrate without warning. One second, you're planning your anniversary trip, maybe thinking about Greece or that cabin in Colorado that Victoria used to go on about during our happier days. The next second, you're sleeping in your car outside a 24-hour diner, frantically checking your phone to see if your bank accounts are still joint and whether she's already started dismantling the financial life you built together. By the time sunrise painted the sky in soft pastels, I found myself parked in front of my friend Kevin's house. He's been my best friend since our college days, the one guy in my life who never sugarcoats anything and always tells me the brutal truth, even when I don't want to hear it. When Kevin opened his front door and saw the look on my face, he didn't ask any questions or demand explanations. He just stepped aside wordlessly and let me into his home. "Is it Victoria?" he finally asked, after handing me a mug of terrible instant coffee and watching me struggle to keep my hands steady enough to hold it properly. I nodded, not trusting my voice to work correctly. "She's been seeing someone for months," I managed to say. Kevin's mouth twisted into something between a wince of sympathy and a snarl of anger. "You want to tell me who it is? Or should I just guess which one of her gym rats finally made his move?" he asked bluntly. "Brandon," I replied. "Real estate agent. Met him through her sister or something like that." Kevin didn't say anything for a long while after I told him about Brandon. He just stared at the floor like he wanted to punch a hole straight through it. When I finally told him about the video I had discovered, the FaceTime call I had overheard, and all the cruel things Victoria had said to me during our confrontation, he got up abruptly and paced around the room once before turning back to face me. "Man, she's poison. You see that now, right?" Kevin said, with the kind of blunt honesty that only a true friend can deliver. "She didn't just cheat on you. She systematically dismantled your entire marriage and then acted like you were annoying her by noticing what she was doing." I nodded slowly as the full weight of his words began to sink in. It was starting to become clear that Victoria hadn't just betrayed me physically with another man. She had minimized me as a person, undermined every moment we had built together, and made me feel like a stranger in my own damn house. The emotional manipulation had been just as devastating as the affair itself. I ended up staying at Kevin's place for 4 full days. During that time, Victoria sent me exactly 5 text messages, each one more coldly calculated than the last. The first 2 were businesslike and distant. "I assume you're staying with someone. Please let me know if you're getting a lawyer, and I need you to grab your stuff by Saturday. Brandon's going to start staying over more often." The third message was a picture of a package that had been delivered to our house, a smartwatch I had saved up for and ordered weeks earlier, back when I still thought we had a future together. "Your little Amazon thing came," the message read. "Want me to throw it away?" The fourth message was just silence, as if she was bored waiting for any kind of response from me and had moved on to more interesting things. The fifth message came 2 days later and consisted of a single word. "Daniel?" I didn't reply to any of her messages. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of feeding that fire or engaging in whatever game she was trying to play. Let her talk to herself. Let her rehearse her new life with Brandon, the guy who flexes in mirrors and probably calls brunch fuel sessions. I was done being a supporting character in the drama she was directing. By the end of that fourth day, something fundamental inside me had shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore, and it wasn't even the burning rage I had felt initially. Instead, it was a crystal clear sense of purpose and determination. I was completely done playing the role of Victoria's ghost, and I was ready to become something solid and real again. The first concrete action I took was closing our joint bank account. I didn't even tell Victoria I was doing it. I just walked into the bank with my ID and a level of calm determination that actually scared me a little. When the teller asked if I was absolutely sure about splitting the account, I nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, split it down the middle," I told her firmly. "She's got her own reality now, and I'm not funding it anymore." I moved what was rightfully mine into a brand new account that Victoria would never be able to touch again. Next came dealing with the house situation. I still had a copy of the lease agreement, and fortunately, it was in my name. We had always joked during happier times that if things ever went south between us, I'd probably be the one couch surfing while she kept the nice place. Well, guess what, Victoria? Turns out I don't do couches, and I definitely don't do clean exits on anyone else's terms but my own. I called our landlord and gave them 45 days notice that I would be moving out. I made it crystal clear that they shouldn't expect rent payments from my side after that point. Victoria could figure out her own housing situation with her real estate agent boyfriend. Maybe Brandon could help her find a place that fit their new lifestyle together. Then came the hardest part of this whole process, going back to the house. Not to talk things through, not to fight about what had happened, and certainly not to try to salvage anything from the wreckage of our marriage. I just needed to collect my belongings and leave. I carefully timed my visit for a Tuesday morning when I knew Victoria would be at work or wherever she was spending her days now. The house felt like an elaborate stage set when I walked through the front door. Everything was arranged too neatly, too perfectly, like she was staging the space for someone else to see. Maybe she was already planning to bring Brandon over more frequently and wanted everything to look just right for him. There were new candles on the coffee table, ones I didn't recognize and definitely hadn't chosen. My books were no longer scattered on the couch where I used to read, and the phone charger I always kept near the end table where I'd fall asleep scrolling through social media was completely gone. The space felt sterile, curated, and utterly empty of anything that reminded me of the life we had supposedly shared. When I went to our bedroom closet, I discovered that Victoria had already taken the initiative to organize my belongings. By organize, I mean she had unceremoniously shoved all of my clothes into 3 laundry baskets and pushed them into the far corner of the closet, like I was an unwelcome guest who had overstayed their welcome. There was even a note waiting for me on the kitchen island, written in Victoria's sharp, precise handwriting. "Please don't take anything that wasn't yours. I'll Venmo you for the utilities." She had signed it with just her first initial, V. I actually laughed out loud when I read Victoria's note, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through that cold, perfect living room. I packed my belongings quickly and efficiently, gathering my clothes, books, and anything else that still felt like it belonged to me rather than to the stranger who had taken over my wife's body. I made sure to leave our wedding photo face down on the nightstand, unable to look at those 2 smiling people who no longer existed. As I was heading toward the back door to leave for the final time, something in the trash caught my attention. Tucked between an empty wine bottle and a crumpled grocery bag was what looked like a greeting card. I pulled it out and immediately recognized it as the birthday card I had bought for Victoria just a few weeks earlier. The envelope was still sealed, completely unopened. I found myself staring at my own handwriting on the front of the envelope, remembering how carefully I had chosen my words when I wrote whatever message was inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the card to see what I had written to my wife during what I now realized were the final days of our marriage. Inside, I had written something long and heartfelt about how proud I was of her, how I recognized that we were going through a rough patch, but still believed deeply in our relationship. I had told her that I still loved her and wanted to work through whatever problems we were facing together. She had never even bothered to open it. She had simply thrown my birthday wishes, my expressions of love, and my hopes for our future directly into the trash without a second thought. This wasn't just casual indifference. This was a deliberate choice to discard not just the card, but everything it represented about my feelings for her. That unopened birthday card was the final piece of evidence I needed to understand exactly who Victoria really was underneath the facade she had been maintaining. I walked out of that house with the card still clutched in my hand, not as some kind of sentimental keepsake, but as proof of the kind of person who could throw away someone's love without even acknowledging it existed. Kevin was waiting for me when I returned to his place, watching me carry in 3 suitcases and a cardboard box filled with memories I wasn't ready to examine yet. He didn't ask questions about how the packing had gone, or whether I had encountered Victoria. He just handed me a cold beer and said simply, "Your room's ready whenever you need it." I spent that first night just sitting in Kevin's guest room, not crying and not feeling angry anymore. I just felt completely drained, like someone had wrung out every last drop of emotion from my body and left behind nothing but an empty shell. I kept looking at that birthday card, reading my own words that now seemed hollow and humiliating. That was me practically begging for crumbs of affection, while Victoria was already planning to toss the entire meal to someone else. The next morning, I received a text message from an unknown number that caught me completely off guard. "Hey, I'm sorry about all this," it read. "Victoria told me you guys were separated months ago. I didn't know the real situation. If I had, I wouldn't have gotten involved, you know? Just wanted to say that." The message was signed off in a way that made it clear this was Brandon reaching out to me directly. I stared at that message for a very long time, reading it over and over while trying to decide how I felt about receiving an apology from the man who had been sleeping with my wife. My first instinct was to type back, "You two deserve each other." But something stopped me. I actually typed out the message and had my finger hovering over the send button before I deleted it entirely. I didn't delete the message because I had forgiven Brandon, and I certainly didn't delete it because I believed his claim that Victoria had told him we were already separated. I deleted it because I realized that Brandon was completely irrelevant to the real problem. He wasn't the reason my marriage had fallen apart. Victoria was. She was the architect of this entire catastrophe, and she had already started rebuilding her life on the ruins of ours like nothing meaningful had ever existed in the first place. I spent that entire week existing in a strange kind of limbo. My job had generously given me time off to sort out my personal situation. Kevin had made space for me in his home, and my phone stayed mostly silent except for the occasional polite check-in from concerned coworkers who had noticed something was wrong. Victoria didn't message me again after that final Daniel text, not once. She didn't ask where I had gone, whether I needed anything from the house, or even try to argue about the rent situation I had left her to handle alone. That complete silence from Victoria ended up being the loudest, clearest answer I had ever received from her. It told me everything I needed to know about what I had actually meant to her during our marriage, and what my absence meant to her now. That weekend, I had an unexpected encounter that drove home just how thoroughly Victoria had rewritten the narrative of our relationship. I was at a local coffee shop when I ran into Carmen, Victoria's sister, who looked like she had seen a ghost when she spotted me. "Daniel," she said, blinking rapidly in surprise. "I didn't think I'd see you here." I nodded politely and replied, "I didn't think I'd ever have to see you again either, to be honest." Carmen looked down at her coffee cup uncomfortably before saying, "I didn't know about them, about Victoria and Brandon. Not until after everything happened. She kept it quiet from the family." I raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You posted the video, Carmen." She winced visibly at the reminder. "I thought they were already together as a couple," she said defensively. "Victoria told me you guys were like unofficially done and had been for a while." I felt a familiar surge of anger. "And you didn't think to ask me directly about any of this?" Carmen looked genuinely ashamed, though I wasn't entirely sure whether her regret was real or just convenient now that the truth had come out. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I thought I was supporting her through what I believed was an amicable separation. Now I don't even know who my sister really is anymore." I finished my coffee and stood up to leave. "Then we're finally on the same page about something," I told her before walking out. I didn't look back, and in that moment, I realized something important had shifted. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about complete erasure. Victoria hadn't wanted to hurt me. She had wanted me to simply vanish from her life entirely. But I wasn't going to let her win by disappearing quietly. That week, I started writing everything down. Not for anyone else to read, just for my own sanity and clarity. I needed to get all the noise and emotional weight out of my head and onto paper where I could examine it objectively. I filled half a notebook in just 3 days, recording memories, thoughts, and all the little things Victoria had said and done that now felt like flashing red warning signs I had somehow missed or ignored. I wrote about every conversation, every dismissive comment, every time she had made me feel like I was asking for too much by expecting basic consideration in our marriage. It was like I was testifying to my own sanity, creating a record that proved I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt and betrayed by what she had done to us. One evening, Kevin found my notebook sitting open on the kitchen table and flipped through a few pages before looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You ever think about posting this somewhere?" he asked. "Like on a forum or something, where other people going through similar situations might relate to it." I laughed bitterly at the suggestion. "Yeah, because what the world really needs is another heartbroken guy ranting online about his ex-wife," I replied sarcastically. But even as I dismissed Kevin's idea, something about it stuck with me and wouldn't let go. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about needing pity or validation from strangers on the internet. It was about not letting my story end in complete silence. I wanted what I had experienced to matter somehow, maybe to help someone else recognize the warning signs I had missed, or at least to prove that people can survive this kind of systematic emotional destruction. I didn't post anything online yet, but I started shaping my writing differently. I began turning my raw pain into coherent paragraphs, organizing my thoughts into something that might actually help another person someday. For the first time since discovering Victoria's affair, writing felt like taking control of something that was entirely mine again. Meanwhile, Victoria had gone completely public with her relationship with Brandon. Their pictures were suddenly appearing all over our mutual friends' social media feeds. Sunset photos, brunch selfies, and an endless parade of that stupid flexing arm emoji that Brandon seemed to overuse in every caption. This wasn't subtle or discreet. It was strategic and deliberate. Victoria wanted to be seen with him, and more importantly, she wanted me to see them together. But here's the real kicker in this whole twisted situation. One night, completely out of nowhere, my phone rang with a blocked number. I let it go straight to voicemail, not interested in dealing with whatever sales pitch or robocall was waiting for me. Later that evening, I finally listened to the message, and I was shocked to hear Victoria's voice coming through the speaker. Her voice sounded shaky and worn down, completely different from the cold, calculating tone she had used during our final confrontation. "Daniel, I don't know why I'm calling you," the voicemail began. "Maybe I just thought you'd understand more than anyone else what I'm going through right now. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I thought I wanted this new life. I thought it would feel better than what we had." There was a long pause before she continued. "I thought everything would be clearer once I made the choice, but it's not." Then the line went dead. That message didn't hit me the way I thought it would when I first heard Victoria's voice. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied to hear her expressing doubt about the choices she had made. Instead, the whole thing felt completely hollow and self-serving. Even in her moment of guilt and uncertainty, she couldn't reach out to me as her former husband or as someone she had deeply hurt. She was only reaching out for her own comfort, looking for someone to absolve her of the guilt she was finally starting to feel. The voicemail made it clear that Victoria didn't want me back in any meaningful sense. She just wanted to be forgiven without doing any of the actual work that forgiveness requires. She wanted me to make her feel better about what she had done without taking any real responsibility for the damage she had caused. That's when I realized with complete clarity that I was finally, truly free. Not because Victoria had released me from our marriage, but because I had stopped holding on to any hope that she might change or that our relationship could somehow be salvaged. I took off my wedding ring that night, gathered up all our old photos, and created a digital graveyard for everything that reminded me of our life together. I even deleted the Spotify playlist we used to listen to while cooking dinner together on Sunday afternoons. This wasn't about erasing our history out of bitterness or spite. This was about rebirth, about creating space for a new version of myself to emerge from the ashes of what Victoria had destroyed. It was a Thursday afternoon when I finally worked up the courage to tell my parents what had happened. I had been keeping the truth from them for weeks, not out of shame or embarrassment, but because I wasn't ready to see the look on their faces when I said the words out loud. We were on a video call, and my mom tilted her head with concern the second she saw me on the screen. "You look thin," she said immediately, "and tired. What's going on?" I managed a weak smile and said, "I need to tell you both something, and it's not great news." I told them everything, not just about the affair, but about the FaceTime call I had overheard, the confrontation in our bedroom, and the way Victoria had looked at me like I was a piece of leftover food she had forgotten about in the refrigerator. My dad didn't speak for a very long time after I finished telling them the whole story. He just looked off camera with his jaw clenched tight, processing everything I had shared with them. My mom started crying when I told her about finding the birthday card in the trash, still unopened after all those weeks. That particular detail seemed to break her heart more than anything else I had described. She always seemed a little distant when we visited, but I never thought she was capable of something like this, my mom whispered through her tears. She's not the same person I married, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Or maybe she is exactly who she always was, and I just completely missed all the warning signs. My dad finally spoke up, his voice firm and reassuring. No, son, you didn't miss anything important, he said. She either changed into someone completely different, or she finally decided to show you who she really was underneath the mask she'd been wearing. Either way, this disaster is absolutely not your fault. I didn't realize how desperately I needed to hear those words from my father until they came out of his mouth. I nodded, feeling something tight and painful finally loosening in my chest. Having my parents' support and validation meant more to me than I had expected it would. That same night, I started seriously looking for apartments of my own. This wasn't about finding a backup plan or a temporary solution. This was about taking the next concrete step forward in rebuilding my life. I had been sleeping in Kevin's guest room for weeks now, surrounded by moving boxes and living on borrowed time. But now I wanted my own space, my own keys, and a completely new address that Victoria would never have any reason to visit. I found a place downtown that felt perfect for this new chapter of my life. It was small and minimalist, with high ceilings and sunlight pouring through wide windows that made everything feel clean and bright. The apartment felt untouched by my past, and most importantly, it felt entirely mine in a way that our old house never had. Moving day arrived faster than I had expected, and Kevin helped me carry all my boxes and belongings up to my new place. At one point during the move, he found an old framed photograph of Victoria and me from a trip we had taken to Boston during happier times. Trash? He asked, already halfway to the garbage bin with the frame in his hand. I hesitated for just a moment, looking at those two smiling people who seemed like strangers to me now. Yeah, I said finally. Definitely trash. That night, I sat on the floor of my new apartment with Chinese takeout and a cheap beer, watching the city come alive outside my window. There were car horns honking, lights twinkling in other buildings, and the general buzz of life continuing all around me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken or damaged. Instead, I felt unburdened, like a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. There's a significant difference between feeling broken and feeling unburdened, and you only truly understand that distinction once you've clawed your way out of something that was slowly killing your spirit day by day. Victoria had sent one last message about 3 days before I moved into my new apartment. Hope you're okay, it read. Just wanted to say I really did love you at one point. I just couldn't breathe anymore in our relationship. I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over, but I never replied. She had mistaken my silence for forgiveness, but what she was actually witnessing was closure. I wasn't ignoring her message out of spite or anger. I simply had nothing left to say to her. Our chapter was completely finished, and I had no interest in writing an epilogue. I didn't hear from Victoria again after that final text. No more messages, no more voicemails, just complete and total silence. She vanished from my world entirely, like a scene change in a play I no longer had any interest in watching. For a while, that silence was all I needed to move forward. It wasn't peace yet, not exactly, but it was the space I desperately needed to eventually build that peace for myself. Living alone felt strange at first. The quiet in my apartment was a different kind of loud than what I had experienced living with Victoria during those final months of our marriage. But slowly, steadily, I began to fill that silence with things that actually belonged to me. I put books on the shelves, created my own playlists that echoed through the rooms, and even started using coffee mugs that had chips and imperfections from actual daily use rather than the pristine, untouchable dishware Victoria had always insisted on. There was no more tiptoeing around someone else's mood, no more performing the role of the grateful husband, and no more walking on eggshells to avoid triggering whatever unnamed dissatisfaction was simmering beneath the surface of our interactions. I even started cooking again. Not because I was trying to impress anyone or maintain some domestic routine, but simply because I wanted to eat something I had made with my own hands. The first real meal I attempted in my new kitchen was an absolute disaster. I burnt the chicken beyond recognition and somehow managed to undercook the rice at the same time. But I ate every single bite of that terrible meal because it tasted like defiance, like independence, like the beginning of rebuilding my life on my own terms. A few weeks after settling into my new place, I had an unexpected encounter at the grocery store that made me realize how much I had already changed. I ran into a woman named Lisa, who I knew vaguely through work. We had shared a few elevator rides over the years and made small talk about weather and weekend plans. She looked surprised to see me in a grocery store so far from the neighborhood where she knew I used to live. "Didn't you used to live out near West Side?" she asked curiously. "I used to," I replied with a genuine smile. "But I got out of there." She tilted her head with the kind of concern that comes from recognizing when someone's life has taken a significant turn. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I paused for a moment, considering how to answer that question honestly. "Everything's finally starting to be okay," I said. And I realized as the words came out of my mouth that I actually meant them. Lisa and I ended up talking for quite a while, just standing there between the bread aisle and the fruit section of the grocery store. The conversation felt surprisingly easy and natural, with no emotional weight or hidden agendas lurking beneath the surface. There were no secrets to keep, no careful navigation around sensitive topics, and no performance anxiety about saying the right thing. When I finally walked away from that conversation, I realized something remarkable had happened. I hadn't thought about Victoria even once during our entire exchange. When I got home that evening, I made another startling discovery. I didn't automatically check Victoria's social media accounts to see what she was up to or who she was with. I didn't scroll through Brandon's Instagram to torture myself with updates about their relationship. I simply forgot to do these things, not because I was forcing myself to avoid them, but because they had genuinely slipped my mind entirely. That was the real turning point in my healing process. The moment when Victoria stopped being the ghost haunting every room of my mental space. I stopped writing imaginary letters to the version of her I wished existed, stopped needing some form of revenge or vindication, and stopped fantasizing about some grand finale where she would show up at my door crying and begging for forgiveness while expressing deep regret for everything she had done. No, that's not how real healing works, and that's definitely not how I wanted my story to end. I finally understood that genuine healing isn't about waiting for the person who hurt you to recognize your worth or validate your pain. Healing is about remembering your own value yourself and making sure you never let anyone take it away from you again. Spring arrived quickly in the city that year, and suddenly the streets were filled with people on bicycles again. Restaurant patios overflowed with laughter and conversation, and there was that warm, promising breeze in the air that makes you feel like absolutely anything is possible. Along with the changing season, I felt the last traces of coldness and bitterness inside me beginning to melt away completely. I started running again, something I hadn't done since before Victoria began staying out late and dismissing my concerns with phrases like, "You wouldn't understand anyway." There was something profoundly honest about the feeling of pavement under my feet and the way my chest ached from physical effort rather than emotional heartbreak. I wasn't trying to escape from my problems anymore. Instead, I was chasing after something positive. I was chasing after the best version of myself. Lisa and I started texting back and forth regularly, sharing the kind of light, playful banter that doesn't carry heavy expectations or emotional baggage. She sent me a photo of her cat wearing a cardboard crown she had made, and I responded with a picture of a pizza I had nearly burned to a crisp in my oven. These interactions were simple and genuine, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I felt like I had the emotional space and energy to let something new exist in my life without Victoria's ghost whispering criticism and doubt in the corners of my mind. Then one evening, completely out of nowhere, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained just one word: drinks? I stared at the screen for a moment, and even though the sender hadn't identified themselves, I knew immediately that it was Victoria reaching out. My heart didn't race with anxiety, my hands didn't shake with nervousness, and I didn't feel that familiar knot of dread forming in my stomach. I didn't respond to her message that night, or the next day, or ever. Instead, I simply deleted the text and went about my evening as if it had never arrived. I wasn't ignoring her out of anger or spite. I was genuinely, completely done with that chapter of my life. That weekend, I took care of the very last remnants of my relationship with Victoria. I gathered up the few remaining items I had kept out of some misguided sense of obligation. The phone charger she had left behind during her hasty packing, a Polaroid photo I had found wedged in an old book, and the spare house key I had never bothered to throw away. I walked all of these items down to the dumpster behind my apartment building and dropped them in one by one. There was no ceremony, no dramatic monologue, and no symbolic ritual. I just said goodbye in the most final, definitive way possible, by letting go of every physical reminder of what we had once meant to each other. As I walked back up the stairs to my apartment, the sun was setting over the city, painting everything in warm, golden light. I swear there was a part of me that no longer felt like a man recovering from betrayal and heartbreak. Instead, I felt like someone who had been completely reborn from those experiences, not untouched by what had happened, but definitely stronger, clearer, and more whole than I had been before. It's been 4 months now since I discovered Victoria's affair, and that time feels like both the blink of an eye and an entire lifetime. I still occasionally get people asking what happened to my marriage. Mutual friends who don't know the whole story. Coworkers who noticed I stopped wearing my wedding ring. Acquaintances who wonder why I moved downtown. I don't go into detailed explanations anymore because there's simply no need to unpack all of that emotional baggage again and again. I just tell people that Victoria and I grew apart, and I leave it at that. The truth is, I didn't just survive what she did to me, I completely outgrew it. That version of myself who used to wait by the door for her to come home, who twisted himself into impossible knots, trying to prove he was worth staying for, who accepted crumbs of affection while desperately hoping for more. That man died the night Victoria laughed at me through her phone screen, thinking I would never hear it. I'm not mourning the death of that previous version of myself. Instead, I'm grateful to him because he endured everything he had to endure long enough to get me to this place of strength and self-respect. He suffered through the worst of Victoria's emotional abuse and manipulation so that I could emerge on the other side as someone who would never accept that kind of treatment again. Lisa and I did eventually end up getting that drink together, and it was refreshing in ways I hadn't expected. There were no hidden expectations between us, no emotional baggage weighing down our conversation, and no complicated history to navigate around. We were simply two people starting fresh with each other, which felt like a luxury I hadn't experienced in years. When Lisa smiled while talking, it seemed genuine and natural rather than calculated or performed. She asked me about my hobbies and interests instead of interrogating me about my past relationships or demanding detailed explanations for my recent life changes. I told her about my failed cooking experiments and how I had once accidentally signed up for a yoga class that turned out to be designed specifically for toddlers. She laughed so hard at that story that she nearly snorted her wine, which was both endearing and completely authentic. I don't know where things will go with Lisa, and for the first time in my adult life, that uncertainty doesn't frighten me at all. I'm not looking for her to be a replacement for Victoria, and I'm certainly not trying to erase my painful memories by covering them up with someone new. That chapter of my life with Victoria is permanently closed, not just temporarily covered over with a Band-Aid solution. If you're reading this and you find yourself in the same dark place I was in not too long ago, where everything feels fundamentally cracked and broken, where the person you trusted most has become the one who hurt you the worst, here's what I want you to know. You will not completely shatter, even when it feels like you're about to fall apart entirely. You will bend under the pressure, you will definitely get bruised by the experience, and you will probably curse the air around you more than once. But you will come back from this stronger than you were before. Don't waste your time and energy waiting for them to make sense of what they did to you. Don't sit around hoping for an apology that's wrapped up in genuine guilt and remorse. Don't wait for that magic message that proves they finally regret destroying your relationship. Instead, focus on living better, loving again when you're ready, but only on your own terms this time. Take back control of your own narrative and story. Because the worst thing they ever did wasn't just betraying your trust and breaking your heart. The worst thing they did was thinking you wouldn't have the strength to recover from what they put you through. And the best thing you'll ever do is prove them completely wrong about your resilience. Every single day for the rest of your life. You're stronger than they gave you credit for, and you deserve so much better than what they were willing to give you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially not the voice in your head that might still be echoing their criticisms and put-downs. The sun is setting on this chapter of my story, but it's rising on whatever comes next. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm genuinely excited to find out what that will be.